Today I'm super excited. We're going to be painting a latte, but it's almost Valentine's Day, so we're going to be making some heart art on that latte. Now to make our latte, we're gonna start by stamping a circle to make it that much easier for us to actually get a nice neat circle in our latte cup. So to stamp a circle, what I like to do is paint some paint on the edge of a mason jar. Basically something that will not absorb the paint. So like I've tried it with a toilet paper tube and it doesn't work because the cardboard absorbs the paint color. We want something that's non-porous like glass or plastic that will let the paint just come off again. So I'm gonna be doing some brown, some of like the latte brown color, and just painting it right on the edge of this mason jar. Now, you could technically kind of dip the jar in paint, but you would need like a pretty large area of paint. And we want the paint to be somewhat creamy in consistency to make sure it actually shows up and transfers and isn't too watery. So it won't make a perfect circle. It's gonna have some like broken spaces, but let's take a look at how this stamp works. Excellent, I've got a nice, neat circle. So now I'm just gonna take some water and water down my brown paint a little further. And what I need to do is paint the negative space of my latte art. So the art is gonna be a heart. That's gonna be hard to say. And the coffee is everywhere around the heart. So let's start just by kind of getting this edge a little bit wider. So I'm just gonna follow this circle and kind of pull some of this brown into the middle. Now, I kind of wanna warm up my brown a little bit. My brown needs a bit of orange. If you've drank a lovely latte before, they're not quite this chocolatey of an orange. If you hear bells ringing, that is my studio assistant, aka Iro the dog, trying to ask to go OUT, but unfortunately he's going to have to wait. So here I mix some orange with my brown and see how that kind of warms it up a bit. I think I like that type of brown a little bit better, so I'm gonna start using that. He's very persistent today. It's okay if my first brown wasn't quite the same. It's okay if that brown kind of switches throughout the painting. Okay, so now what I'm gonna start to do is pull this coffee towards the middle where this latte art heart is going to be. So I'm gonna pretty much fill in this top area. Now, if there's a little bits of white left, that's okay too. So maybe I'll leave those little partial bits of white. And I'm gonna make now a few like loose, maybe more watery than this, kind of strokes kind of going in this curve, because when you make latte art, you kind of push the coffee around quite a bit and it doesn't necessarily make like a perfect heart all the way everywhere. So I'm just gonna push a few little heart-like stripes, but I also want this coffee on the edge to kind of come towards it more. So as I make these stripes, then I'll kind of play with and finesse this kind of outer edge of coffee to go with those curves. So it's kind of a back and forth between the negative space, which is the white space, and then this coffee, which is everything else, which is the positive space that we're adding. All right, I want that nice little point at the bottom there. Okay, and then I want there to be a really distinct heart in the middle. So I'm gonna pull this down a little further and then make a nice kind of actual heart shape. Oh, that got a little lopsided, but that's okay. And make that have a little bit of a darker edge to it so we can actually kind of see where it is. And then everything else is kind of more loose. But there's like my distinct heart. And I'm gonna make a few more strokes around it to just, again, show how that coffee has moved as the latte was poured. And we'll have it kind of connect down here at the bottom again. Now, I'm gonna use a pretty light brown and just kind of, well, maybe even, actually, okay, cleaning my brush, drying it off a bit, and I'm gonna go and just smudge a little bit of some of these edges. So with a mostly dry brush, it's damp, it's got a little bit of water, I'm just kind of smudging some of those edges because I don't want it to be as stark. So I can get a little water, clean water, dab it dry. Oh my goodness, puppy dog. If any of you have tips for raising a puppy, it's gotten easier. but man, he is persistent. Okay. That's looking good so far. I'm gonna pause here, go deal with my dog, come back and we'll keep going. Okay, dog has been taken care of. We should be good to go. One thing I love that's happening, because we did that stamp on the edge, look how we've got this kind of fun uneven. It's like there's little bubbles hiding in there. I just love how that edge turned out. To push that kind of idea of bubbles further, I'm gonna do a few like darker little dots places, and I'll do some light ones at the end too. But just with the tip of my brush kind of along the edge, just a few little dots, just to kind of suggest, I feel like I have too much paint in my brush. Dab it a little bit. I could also use a skinnier brush, I suppose. There, just a few little dots to kind of break up that edge a little bit. Now we're gonna paint the cup that this latte art is in, again, thinking about negative space. So painting what's not there. I'm gonna be using gray to kind of paint a white cup. So I'm painting the shadow of the cup. To do that, I'm gonna imagine this cup a little bit kind of below, or the plate really. The cup, we're just gonna barely see the edge. So the plate a little bit low. Actually, real process happening. We're gonna sketch a little bit first because it's hard to paint the absence of something when there's not really an edge to it. So I'm gonna just very lightly sketch the rim of this coffee cup just by tracing, leaving a bit of a gap. Around the latte art, trying to keep it the same distance from the latte art is my goal when I'm tracing like this. Be very careful if your paint is still wet. I still had a few little wet drops. I gotta be very careful brushing away any eraser. A kneaded eraser might be better if the paint's still wet. Okay, and then I'm gonna paint my little handle. Just very small because I'm running out of space on my paper. And I'm gonna make it look like we can just kind of barely see this edge of it. So we're mostly looking down, but we'll be able to see a little bit of the edge, because then I'm gonna draw the plate that it's sitting on. And again, that's what's gonna be a little bit more in this direction. So I'm coming off of the cup itself and coming down lower so we can kind of see some of the plate. It changes our perspective a little bit. We're not looking completely straight down, but at a bit of an angle, which just keeps things interesting. You could make the plate perfectly around the cup as well. Just up to you, the choice you wanna make. And then I think those are the main lines I want. Now, what I like to do is once I've sketched things, especially if I'm gonna paint right on top of them, I'm just gonna lighten them a little bit with my eraser in case, I really don't want them to show at the end. So I'm just gonna go over everything and lighten it a little bit with my eraser. So especially if you are heavy-handed with your pencil, go through and just do a little bit of erasing to make it a bit harder to see. Okay, now we can go back to actually painting our cup. So once again, I'm using some watered down black, so light gray, to paint the absence. So I'm gonna paint the plate and make the cup look white. So I'm putting the shadow right below where the rim of my cup is. And now that I've drawn that, I know where it is. So I'm gonna go along all these edges. I don't really want this dry brush to happen, so that means I was running out of water. So I'm gonna pick up a bit more fresh water and go along those edges all the way to the edge. Practically, I'm gonna leave a little bit of a lip on this plate as well. And ideally what I can do is then using plain water, I can kind of fade this gray on the plate from the rim of the cup out to the edge and just make it a gradual transition by watering it down. So it's darkest right up against the cup and it's slowly getting lighter. So look how that negative space now is the rim of our cup. So it helps us see that better. Now I might put a tiny bit in this little corner here as well. Make sure I can see that part of the plate. The handle, I'm gonna do a little bit of it on the handle, especially on the inside of the handle. That can be a tiny bit darker because it would be in shadow. So doing a little bit of a dark gray in there. Oops, I gotta be careful. Just got some on the handle of my cup. I'm gonna dry my brush and use a dry brush to kind of soak up a little bit of paint. You can also use a tissue or a towel to kind of dab or wipe away when it gets somewhere you don't want it. And kind of fudge and fade that gray out to the edge. Now the top of my cup is hard to see, so I'm just gonna do a very light gray kind of right on that pencil that I drew, just to show that kind of outer edge so I can now see where my coffee cup is, even at the topmost part. Now, last thing we should do, just because it'll be fun, is to give kind of a splash of color around the edge. So this could be a table, this could be a coffee spill, this could be a tablecloth, whatever. I'm gonna use the same brown that's kind of in our coffee so that it all kind of matches. I'm gonna water it down so it's more of a coffee consistency, not super milky, but not super watery. And I'm gonna go along the edge of our plate, and I'm just gonna intentionally make this sort of wobbly splash sort of edge. So look how I'm kind of wiggling my brush out and letting it kind of move and wobble. I'm gonna do this over here as well, and just kind of have there be a non-distinct edge to the brown I'm adding. So if it was a table, I could do this with like horizontal lines. I could actually paint all the way to the edge of the picture. My goal is just to emphasize or show where the edge of this plate is. So that's where I'm focusing. And I also have to watch out for my tape. I don't really want any hard edges on this one. So I'm trying to avoid getting up against the tape, or when I peel off the tape, it'll look like an exact sort of flat edge. All right, and maybe just a little bit, maybe a few little dots every so often. That could be kind of fun, like it's got a little splash. And I won't go above my cup because it's kind of around the plate because it's on the table. It's not around the cup. So I'll stop there, maybe do a few little dots. And now I've left some space for a lovely message at the top. If this is a card for someone, I could just make this to make a pretty painting. But today, since this is part of my Valentine's card series, I painted it on a watercolor card, which is then super convenient because I can just untape it and give it to someone. So now it is a card and it's ready to be written inside and to gift to someone. I've got room for a nice message at the top. Oh, I was gonna add one more thing. Sometimes I like to use a white pen. And in this case, same, like, you know, these bubbles or these dots that I added, I think next to them, I wanna do a few white dots as well, just to kind of balance, because oftentimes those bubbles are kind of a combo of dark and light. So I can use my white pen. This is a gel pen. This is in my favorite supply link. You'll find it in the description below if you want one too, but it works really well on top of paint. This is also great if like something got too dark and you didn't want it to, you can kind of draw it back in a little bit. But for this, I especially like it for making these little bubbles at the side, or maybe just a few random other bubbles kind of in amongst the coffee. You might also know that I typically use pen on my art. So just to show you what that might look like, I'm also going to trace some of these lines and give it a more illustrative quality. So this is not necessary. It looks really lovely as just a plain watercolor piece. But what I like to do is use my pen to decide kind of where the actual edge of my shapes are. So this is really nice too if you feel like you made a mistake or the paint didn't go exactly where you wanted it to. You can kind of redraw and make it where you want it to go. So I can follow this circle, and I could even include a bit of the gray into the cup edge to make it a bit of a shadow. I'll trace kind of the handle of my mug as well. So this, I have to make sure I'm doing this when the paint is dry, or it could ruin the pen and it just won't look as good. One thing I like to do when I'm drawing especially is to make sure I'm turning the paper so that my wrist is very comfortable, making sure that the drawing is, then I can make my lines as neat and as smooth as possible. So keeping that in mind. And then normally, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think maybe I'll trace the inside of my cup too, just to get that exactness. But I don't think I'll trace the coffee because the coffee is not an exact object, right? It's just color. So you can kind of pick and choose, if you're a tracer like me, how much you really want to trace and how much you want to leave as plain paint. Oh, this line out here didn't really connect. So now it just kind of gives it a little bit of an illustrative edge, so a bit more definition, a bit more contrast. But again, it wasn't necessary. It totally was fine as a plain watercolor painting. But here we go. I've done another fun watercolor card for you. I hope you have fun painting it, and I will see you in the next project. Featuring today's class distraction.